Speed of iteration is absolutely everything. If you are not moving fast, you are fucked. How big can you scale a company while keeping the headcount tiny? If you imagine you're clinging to the outside of a rocket ship, you can go really far. You might even get into space, but you're not controlling the rocket ship.
Finbarr has been in like the startup ecosystem for a long time, and I actually was really impressed. You were giving me like really sage advice all around Finbarr when we were out at the campsite. We were at a campsite like with a bunch of founders, just kind of talking about ideas and brainstorming, and just honestly hanging out with a bunch of really cool people. But Finbarr, I think like you've been in this industry for a long time, like just in the startup ecosystem, like. How did you get into it? Like, where did you come from to get into it? And like, this is the Silicon Valley bubble. You're in it. You're like in the ecosystem. Like, I'd love to know about like your past, and we can kind of take things from there.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, it really starts, I studied computer science in Scotland at Strathclyde University. And during the course of that degree, I discovered Hacker News. And I was reading TechCrunch and Mashable and VentureBeat and all these other blogs. And I had a Google Reader account. And every day I was reading about all these companies that were doing super well, they were raising all this money, they were launching really cool products. I remember being so impressed when I read, that somebody had raised this $500,000 seed round. I thought that was absolutely huge. And almost all the companies I was reading about were in San Francisco. They were all in the Bay Area. And so it just became this focus for me of, okay, I need to figure out how to get there. That's clearly the place where all this innovation is happening. And so at the end of my degree, which was in 2011, I applied for jobs all around the world, but with a particular focus on Silicon Valley. And I ended up getting a job with Groupon, which was awesome. I had a really great time working there. But I'd moved out to the Bay Area with kind of the express intent of starting a company. And quite quickly after Groupon, I ended up joining a small startup. And yeah, it kind of all goes from there. But that was how I got into it in the first place.
So Groupon. So that was like, I mean, Groupon was massive. Like it was like a energy bubble. Like this is like it was like a force of nature for such a long time.
Right.
Was the founder there when you joined, or was it post-founder?
Yeah, so I applied for Groupon around April or May of 2011. I got a job offer June or July of 2011, and it took 4 or 5 months for the visa to come through. When I got the offer, Groupon was this incredible tech darling that nobody could write a bad word about. It was just amazing. They were like the hottest startup around at that time. After I got the offer, the visa took 4 or 5 months. By the time I arrived in Silicon Valley in October 2011, a lot of bad things had started to be said in the press. But Groupon IPO'd a month later. They IPO'd, I think it was November 2011, which was incredible. I was there the day of the Groupon IPO. They had a big cake. The founder, Andrew, was still there. He's a really cool guy. But yeah, it was an interesting time because Groupon's stock price fell 90% in the 12 months after that. And so it was a real taste of the sort of boom and bust cycles of Silicon Valley.
Got it. So I actually have like this question where you actually mentioned Hacker News there. So what kind of impact did Hacker News and reading all these articles? Because I'm like super into reading Hacker News as well. Just going on Reddit and just going on Twitter as well and just finding all these startups. So how exactly did that shape your understanding of the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it really opened my eyes to the fact that there were things happening outside of Scotland. Scotland is an awesome country, tends to be quite insular. They look inward a lot. And it was my first time really looking outward and seeing, oh my God, there's this whole other massive thing going on. And it's happening in San Francisco and in the Bay Area, and a little in New York too. But it really just opened my eyes to how global an ecosystem it is and how the internet is truly everywhere in the world, and how this was a force that I wanted to be involved with because of the way it allows you to distribute things to the whole planet in an instant. And so it just seeing all these companies launching and the traction they got really quickly and how they were able to just come up with these ideas, launch them in days, immediately get traction was just so inspiring to me. And I wanted to move to California and see, where it was all happening and what it was all about. So, I moved to the Bay Area and yeah, I immediately started to immerse myself in hackathons. I went to loads of hackathons. The first year of being in the Bay Area, I went to hackathons every couple of weeks. I won a few prizes, which was good fun. Met loads of people. I'm still in touch with quite a few of them. But really just, yeah, the whole kind of the inspiration. I mean, I always was kind of business minded and entrepreneurial, but the focal point of the Bay Area came from discovering this community around Y Combinator and the all the incredible innovation that was happening in this area.
Yeah. So my actual, question was on the hackathon part here, right? Because I've actually been to hackathons as well when I was starting off, but
Yeah,
what I've seen is that while doing hackathons, you always have this mindset of just going there for prizes and all of that. But does that really shape when you want to do startups as well, or is it just going to be a hackathon itself? Because I mean, most people do want their hackathon projects to become like actual startups, but do
right.
they actually become that, or did you only go there for the muscle of becoming that hacker?
Yeah, no, I went there for fun. I went there to network, to meet people. I went there to kind of train myself on shipping quickly. I knew absolutely nobody. Before moving to the Bay Area, when I got the job offer from Groupon, I got it via a Skype interview, which, that was what everybody was using at the time. And I'd never set foot in the Bay Area before. So I'd never set foot in California. So, I got this job offer, we did the visa, and I landed 4 or 5 months later. And when I got off the plane to start the job at Groupon, that was my first time here. So I knew literally nobody. I mean, I knew, a few people vaguely that I'd kind of met through the interview process at Groupon and ended up becoming good friends with a bunch of people there. And I'm still friends to this day with quite a few people there, which is amazing. It's such a nice group there. But the hackathons, it was really a way for me to try and get deeper into the startup ecosystem. And it wasn't just hackathons. Like I remember going to Y Combinator's startup school conference back in 2011 and 2012. And I remember that YC did this event in 2012, which was called Work at a Startup. And it was at the YC office in Mountain View. And I went there and I met all these amazing founders, in a very short space of time. And that was less than a year after arriving. And I met Paul Graham and I met all these other people. And, funny story, I actually asked Paul Graham when I was there, hey, is YC hiring software engineers? And he said, no, what would you even do? And I said, I'll do whatever you want. I'll do literally anything you want. And he kind of got distracted and walked away, and that was the end of the conversation. But a few years later, I did end up working for YC as a software engineer. So it sort of was this foreshadowing of something that eventually happened. I think hackathons, back to your question, most people that work on hackathon projects, it doesn't actually become a startup, but you do build some fun stuff. I built some really, really fun projects. The most fun project was we built an anti-social network where when you sign up, you're friends with everybody and you have to block and dislike people you don't want to be friends with anymore. And we got thousands of users within 24 hours and it really kind of blew up. It was a ton of fun. And then we shut it down because it just wasn't a real thing, but it was a fun thing to build.
There's a lot of those crazy types of social networks that kind of take off and then they have this like weird moment.
Right.
And they may not like have the longevity, but it's fun for the moment. It's almost like a video game in a sense. Like
Yeah.
it's there and then like people get bored and they kind of just.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, that was exactly what it was like. I mean, it was something that people were amused with for a very short amount of time. And so were we. It wasn't a real business. It was just something fun.
You have certain traits that like are kind of doer traits, which means like you got to Silicon Valley, you figured out how to get here, you got to like one of the best darlings like Groupon, who no one it was like this pristine like place to work, like it's almost like Google, impenetrable. You got through there. You got into startup school, which was really hard to get into. Like I was there. I think I was there. It was like Mark. There was a bunch of
Zuckerberg was there. Yeah.
Great speakers. Yeah, I was at that
It's
event.
incredible. It was absolutely incredible event.
And then you talk to Paul Graham and you're like, hey, I want to work for you. So you had this mindset that was very different than a lot of people, which was I need to get here and I need to be here and I need to be at ground zero. I don't see a lot of people having that mindset. And that's how they kind of just become complacent. Like, was it your upbringing? Is it just who you are? Was it just like this go-getter attitude? Like what is it?
I think it was. I mean, it's always been my attitude. I think it was partly my upbringing and partly my attitude. I mean, candidly, I grew up in a pretty poor household, so we didn't have any money, and it was always something that was a concern growing up. And when I finished university, with tens of thousands of dollars in debt and no money. And I remember, in the Groupon interviews, speaking to the guy who later became my boss, or he was my boss's boss, at one point as well. Really cool guy, Kyle. I said to him, "Hey, look, if you guys are going to offer me this job, I have no money. You're going to need to help me even buy the plane ticket to get there. That's how little money I have." And he said, "Okay, cool, no worries, we'll figure it out." And they helped me out a little bit, and then I discovered just how expensive Silicon Valley was after I got here, and I realized that they hadn't actually helped me out all that much, but it was all good. But yeah, I think part of it was my upbringing. Even from a fairly young age, I was doing some things to try and make a little bit of money from time to time, and I've just been obsessed with computers. From about the age of 6 or 7 years old, I've been utterly obsessed with computers. I got my first computer when I was about 7. My mom got this secondhand computer from a client. She was a massage therapist, and she paid for this computer with massage therapy to this guy, and he was giving away his old computer, and I got it, and it was like the most incredible thing ever. That's kind of the backstory: is growing up in Scotland, not coming from much in the way of money, being obsessed with computers, realizing how incredible the internet was, and realizing that the combination of the two was so explosive. And wanting to be right where it was happening in Silicon Valley.
Was it a Mac or was it a PC?
It was like an Amstrad, and it had Windows. I don't even think it had Windows 3.1 on it. I think it was like an even older version of Windows. I don't remember exactly, but it had some games on it, and that was what I loved. I played a bunch of games when I was young.
You got the computer, you started to learn how to code on that, or was it too?
No. The coding came later, and actually the coding, I started learning to code when I was about 13 or so, and that was in high school. There was some Visual Basic in high school, and then also I was big into this online game, Rainbow Six, the original Rainbow Six, and there were a lot of people that cheated on that game, and I built an anti-cheat patch for the game, and I learned how to write a bunch of scripts for that. And it was just Bash, actually, but it was sort of like checking files against one another and all that sort of stuff. But that was when I really started to program. And then when I left home when I was 17 and I went to university, and within a year of leaving home, I had learned some really basic web development. And when I was 18, I started a web development business. And throughout university, I built a whole bunch of websites for people. And so I think I built maybe 12 to 15 websites over the course of 4 or 5 years for paying customers in Scotland. And some of them were really cool. Like I built an e-commerce store, a Drupal e-commerce store for a bike shop, and ended up getting a whole bunch of bike gear out of it, which was amazing. And I'm really good friends with the bike store owner to this day. Throughout university, I was obviously doing my course and I even went to hackathons and was doing side projects throughout university. But I also was doing this side business where I was, building websites for paying clients and kind of learning more and more about the trade of, shipping things on the internet.
So, just looking at your journey on paper, it just feels like a documentary movie. I mean, it just feels like, like watching Social Network, right? I mean, just scraping through things and then trying to work at YC, then again, raising from YC. It just feels so perfect here. So, but again, there must have been like one personality trait that you must credit, right? Like, is it just being a go-getter, or like what was it that, that clicked? So I would love to learn that.
I mean, I think it's just like I have a fairly grim determination, and I'll power through things that are very, very difficult for a long period of time. And so, there was other things in my childhood that I really had to kind of power through. And so I just, I've kept that to this day. I've been fixated for the longest time on the idea of building something at scale for the internet, and you go into that kind of journey and you think it's going to be tons of fun, and of course it's an incredible grind. And that's I ended up starting a couple of companies along the way, and one of them reached significant scale, and it's hard. But I certainly learned a lot from that, and I think I think I would credit being determined, also just curiosity. learning a lot of things all the time, being willing to kind of dive into manuals, reading about all kinds of obscure topics, just going deep on things that are often overlooked is something that I would credit as well. I think just having some empathy for users and just loving solving people's problems, it would be another thing that I would point to. I really get a lot of satisfaction from people deriving value from things I've built.
In this journey, like, did you have was there any kind of impact that happened, or was it like talking to a lot of users, or was it just a special insight that you got that gave you the idea for Shogun? So how did Shogun happen? So that was actually my question there.
Yeah. So I'll quickly paint in a bit of the history, between Groupon and Shogun. At that startup school event, I met Justin Kan, who was a YC partner, and he was the founder of a company called Exec. I worked at Exec for a year, which was incredible. It really taught me how to ship quickly. Justin had this saying, "Perfect is the enemy of done," and that we lived that every day. After that, I started a small company called Give It 100, and that was kind of it ended up not being a great business, but it was a lot of fun. We basically built a site where you sign up, you pick something to practice, and you record a video of yourself doing it every day, and you see your progress over time. And funny story, we ended up on stage at Startup School in 2013. So me and my co-founder Karen were interviewed on stage by Paul Graham and Sam Altman about our startup Give It 100, which was just crazy. After Give It 100 didn't really work out, that's when I started playing around with different ideas, and I ended up starting Shogun. So I started Shogun originally with Justin Kan's brother Damien, and we set out to solve this problem where every company I'd worked for has had an issue where the marketing team can't update the website, and it's super frustrating for everybody. It's frustrating for engineering because they have to end up updating it. It's frustrating for marketing; they don't want to have to go through engineering; they want to do it themselves. So we set out to build a tool where you plug it into your existing website, and then anybody on your team can use that tool to update the website. And some friends of ours told us they'd pay for it. We built it and launched it. They didn't pay, and so we ended up having to try and find some other customers. The Shogun story is kind of interesting because we spent most of 2015 full-time just hacking on it, talking to literally anybody who would talk to us who had a problem with their website. And it felt like it was going absolutely nowhere. And then our third co-founder, Nick, who joined a few months after we'd started, he was connected with an e-commerce agency, and they said, "Make this work for Shopify and we'll pay you for it." And we made it work for Shopify, and they paid us, and so did tens of thousands of other people. And it just was this super lucky break. But there were several things. Like e-commerce is kind of this vortex. Once you start solving the problems of e-commerce, you end up getting sucked into it. And a lot of people end up that way. E-commerce is just so big, and so many people have the problems and are willing to pay that it's quite an easy space to kind of accidentally end up in. So it was a lucky break for us in a way, but we also had spoken to tons of people, including some e-commerce folks who had got quite close to being customers of ours. So that was sort of the original, that was kind of the backstory of how we got started. It was just, we were trying to solve our own problem of being able to edit the website as a non-technical person, and then we found a really great fit in e-commerce.
E-commerce is, I would say, it's a tough space, but those are the best spaces to be in. Meaning tough, like there's a lot of competitors.
Yeah.
Did you look inward and not look at competitors, or did you go outward and look at what competitors are doing? Like, how do you even build a company in a space where there's so much noise, and some of the products are useless, right? There's a lot of really bad products out there, and then there's really slick modern products.
Yeah. Well, we discovered that Shopify, but we'd never heard of Shopify before, but we heard of Shopify from this agency. We discovered that Shopify didn't have a good visual builder. And the way that our product worked is it plugged into your existing tech stack. So we weren't competing with all the other website builders. We were only inside the Shopify space and helping people who had Shopify websites build their websites on Shopify. And so it was it was kind of this untapped channel with massive demand inside of it. Webflow and Weebly and Wix and Squarespace and all these other builders, they're competitors with Shopify. They've created their own e-commerce functionality. So we were totally insulated against the competition. And we happened to be, we were the second page builder in Shopify, but we were night and day better than the other page builder that was in there at the time. We ended up killing that company. or they shut down. I don't know if it was entirely us, but we certainly were part of the story of them discontinuing their products. We had this perfect situation where we had the exact solution to a problem that a big and growing group of people had in the Shopify platform, and no existing companies were paying attention to it because they were all trying to build their own platforms, not integrating to somebody else's platform.
Would you say that's a better strategy, is like join a rocket ship versus build everything yourself? So you saw, I guess unintentionally, you partnered up with Shopify without, I mean, maybe that was really intentional, but it sounds like that was like a rocket ship that took and
Right.
helped the company.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say it has pros and cons. If you imagine you're clinging to the outside of a rocket ship, you can go really far. You might even get into space, but you're not controlling the rocket ship. You're not deciding where it's going, and you might end up getting burned by the boosters on the rocket ship. And so I think that's kind of what happened to us eventually, but it took a really long time. And we sort of saw it coming as well. But we had years and years of unabated exponential up and to the right growth by just being in Shopify, and later we launched in BigCommerce and Salesforce Commerce Cloud and other platforms too. But we were certainly lucky to be one of the first in the Shopify space. And Shopify is absolutely massive. At the time, it wasn't massive. I think they'd only just IPO'd when we launched on October 2015. We launched on Shopify, and in fact, we launched on Shopify, and it seemed like it wasn't going anywhere, and we all quit and went and got jobs. And that's when I worked for Y Combinator as a software engineer. But by the time I started at YC as a software engineer, day one of YC, Shogun was making $1,000 a month, and then a few months later, it was making $5,000 a month, and a few months after that, it was making $10,000 a month, and then a few months after that, it was making $20,000 a month. And that's when I looked at it and said, "Oh shit, this thing is actually growing really, really fast. Like, what's going on here?" And it wasn't like I was doing no work on it. It started to eat up more and more of my free time. And it got to the point where I just was only working, basically. And I realized I had to focus on one or the other. And I forecast out the growth. At the time, Shogun was growing 15 to 20% per month. And it felt very small. And I forecast out, okay, what's the current revenue times 1.15, drag down 12 columns in Google Sheets. And I realized 15% monthly growth is 435% annual growth. It's super big. It's bigger than you would think when you just think about it mentally. The mental shortcut you take is like, oh, it's probably like 150, 180% growth because you're just timesing by 15. But that's not how it works. Compound growth is completely different. And so it was just this incredible moment of, oh shit, this thing is going to be really big.
So you had this dilemma. You were at Y Combinator, one of the best places to work in the world. So you got that fortunate job, which is amazing.
Yeah, it was awesome.
And then you got this crazy hot startup. Like you were in like a weird position. It was like you fell into Silicon Valley, like the best position to be in. Like
yeah. I fell head first into Silicon Valley, and I came out with, I don't know, a bunch of dollars in my mouth, I guess.
Well, I guess while you were working at YC, like, let's focus on that a second. Like, you probably saw thousands of, founders and saw like what worked, what didn't work. I bet a lot of those learnings applied to your startup, like in a lot of ways. Like you were just seeing what tech they were using, advice they were getting. Like you were seeing all the really smart partners, like give advice. Like, did that correlate to your startup? And like, I guess you must have learned like really good, I'd call it like axioms, like truths, like, I should be doing this because all these really top tier founders are doing this. Like, what are like one or two or three that like you took away? You maybe used a Shogun or not, but like.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, when I left YC, it was hard to do. I mean, YC truly is one of the greatest. It's one of the greatest companies of our time. This is a phenomenal institution. I left in May 2017. And we hadn't raised any money at the time, but we later ended up getting into YC. We were in YC winter 18. But while I was in YC, I absolutely took the time to soak up as much startup advice and startup learnings and just everything about startups that I possibly could. Being at YC is truly like being the center of gravity in the startup universe. You get to see so much interesting stuff. One of the things I did at YC, which was very interesting, YC has a kind of internal CRM system where they're tracking all the updates and stuff from all the companies. One of the first things I did is I built almost like a Facebook feed of every update from every YC company. And then I read it back to the beginning of time. So I read every single company. It took me a long time to read them all, but I was fascinated. And it was both YC company updates as well as partner thoughts on how the companies were doing. And it was like unbelievably interesting. So I just fire hosed that. I read the entire thing. And there were a lot of really interesting takeaways from that. I think speed of iteration is absolutely everything. If you are not moving fast, you are fucked, basically, as a startup. So you have to go as quickly as you can. Getting to some kind of data with an 80% good product is a million times better than waiting a while, with a 90 to 100% good product. So you should launch as soon as possible. But I mean, here's kind of a funny takeaway. One of the biggest things I learned is that every startup is a shit show. There's just stuff broken at every single company. And so that really helped me internally to realize when things were going wrong at Shogun, oh, this is normal. This is just what every company is going through. The very biggest companies are similarly screwed in some way. And everybody's just fighting the fire every single day. And so, that was something that I really internalized at YC. And it was a really good lesson for me as I kind of went forward with Shogun.
Always be launching, essentially, like always be iterating and launching and pushing product to customers. And basically don't let the ship kill you. Like you have to keep going because it's a mess inside. So you have to like fight those battles and just keep pushing the company forward. And that was like, any other tips? Those are really good tips for every founder out there. I mean, every founder should hear this. Yeah.
Yeah. I think avoid co-founder disputes. Like try and have a good co-founder and a good relationship with your co-founder. A co-founder relationship is like a marriage. And a good marriage looks like one with a lot of communication in it. And that's the same thing with a co-founder relationship. My co-founder, Nick, and I are super direct with one another. We tell each other all the things that we're unhappy about and we talk about it and nothing is off the table. I think it's unbelievably important to be able to do that as a startup founder because the number one cause of startup or infant startup mortality is co-founder disputes, people breaking up, big fights, company ends up getting embroiled in all kinds of legal disputes, all kinds of stuff. That kills tons of early stage startups. So you have to have a really solid foundation in your co-founder relationship to be successful.
I'm sure you've had hard disputes. Like, do you guys go on a walk? Do you go like rent an Airbnb? Do you like have one-on-one sessions? Like, what do you do? Do you have executive coaching? Like, what is your strategy?
Yeah. Nick and I, we have very different personalities, but the thing which actually is more from his camp, the thing I think which has really helped us have such a good relationship is Nick wears his heart on his sleeve. He cannot keep a secret. He can't tell a lie. And his personality is just such that if anything is bugging him, he has to talk about it. And so he trained me to seek conflict rather than avoiding conflict. And if he ever felt like I was avoiding conflict, it would bother him. And he would come to me and be like, there's something going on. Like you're bothered about something. You've got to talk to him about it right now. And then one day he came in his feedback. He said, I've noticed that you're conflict avoiding. You're too slow at bringing up when things are bothering you. You've got to be much faster about that. And so it just was, I think I learned a lot from him. And then I learned a lot from, hiring people and managing people and the whole thing of scaling a company, I learned a ton from. But the pivotal moment, I think, in the relationship with Nick was him coming to me and saying to me that he thought I was conflict avoidant. And then I ended up doing some coaching around that. And it's just something that, once I absorb information really well. And so if somebody gives me feedback like that, I internalize it quite quickly. And I then just paid super close attention and was kind of hyper aware of any internal resistance to having a difficult conversation. And I think you have to run towards things that you're resisting internally. Otherwise, it just breeds anxiety, actually. If you try and shut down things that are bothering you internally and you don't run towards them, you end up having a bad time. That applies to startups and beyond, but it certainly applies to co-founder relationships.
So address things head on. Like if there's an issue, do you say it right then and there, or do you wait in private? Like, I don't know, say that there's an employee that's not doing a good job.
Yeah.
Do you bring it up in front of everybody because that's the moment you're thinking about, or do you strategically like?
Yeah, I mean, there's different schools of thought on this, The way that I would usually do it is I would give critical feedback like that one-on-one. But I mean, I'd be direct about things not working in a group setting. I'd be like, okay, this is clearly not working. You know, we're gonna let's connect about this offline and chat about it. And then, you know, there are whole frameworks around giving feedback, and there are things that I've learned about how to give feedback well. You know, we could go into that, but usually the feedback would be given in private, and you know, often then documented and sent to people afterwards, so there's a record of it, so you can refer back to it, and so on and so on.
Got it. Okay, so that's a really really good strategy there. Because you were at YC, did you get the bug to like do investments? Like, is
Yes.
that where you get the bug? Like, do people go and become partners and they have to invest a lot more? Or like, if you're part of the team, you know what I mean? Just part of the like employee base at YC, do people just start investing more aggressively? Like,
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I do actively angel invest. I did not at the time I was working for YC. But YC, I mean, it was mostly during my tenure there. Sam Altman was in charge for I think most of it, or maybe he left kind of right towards the end of me being there. The really interesting thing about the way that YC worked at that time is it was a very flat partnership structure. All partners were equals. Anybody could have an idea. Anybody could drive an initiative. And so it was kind of chaotic by design, where a lot of people were trying out all different things. One of the things that we tried during that period of time was Sam opened it up so that anybody could join YC interviews and actually be an interviewer. So anybody on staff could be an interviewer for YC. And so I got to be in, I don't know, a couple dozen or more interviews for people coming into YC. So I now intimately understand how that whole process works. I also, you know, I worked on the application software, and I worked on the, you know, the CRM that kind of captures all the applications and the ranking of them and all sort of stuff. That was fascinating. One of the things that I used to enjoy doing was I would sit on the sofas in Mountain View outside of the interview rooms, and I would just be sitting there working on my laptop, and teams would come through the door and they would check in for the interview, and they would sit beside me, and I would ask them about their companies, and then I would try and guess, like, okay, is this company going to get in, or are they not going to get in? And then I would, you know, they would go into the room, and when they came back out, I'd be like refreshing the CRM to see if they got in or not. I didn't tell them. Also, I didn't say anything to the teams that were sitting there. But that helped me to kind of tune my, you know, YC fundability meter, because I got quite, you know, I got fairly good at predicting whether people were going to get in or not based on their demeanor and, you know, how they presented and the way that they talked about the problem they were trying to solve and all that sort of stuff. YC wasn't directly the inspiration for being an investor, but I mean, it is an inspiration to all investors. You know, they are kind of the NA plus ultra startup investor. So I don't think there's a better startup investor in the world.
so you're saying, just from that, there was a lot of context there. So YC makes decisions fast. So when they meet a team, it's like, maybe not all of the time, but like when you were there during your time there, they made decisions literally when they walked out.
Absolutely, yeah. They made decisions when they walked out. And at the time, and it may be different now, but at the time, it was implemented such, it was kind of this, the system of admissions was geared towards contrarian viewpoints. Only one person in the room needed to say yes for you again. So that was kind of how it worked. And so obviously based on the fact that most people don't get into YC, there's a lot of no's, you know, a lot of people that come along. I mean, it's only a 10-minute interview, right? And so like, you don't get that much of a 10-minute interview. You're looking for something really exciting in that 10-minute interview. And if you can get across something very exciting in that 10-minute interview, and at least one person in the room is excited about you, you've got a chance getting in. That's how it worked then. Now we're, you know, coming up on 10 years on. We're 8 years on from then. So, you know, it might be a very different process. The leadership's completely changed. The structure's changed. I don't know how they do it these days, but at that point in time, it was geared that way. And truly, they made a decision within minutes of, you know, within seconds often of a team leaving the room, they would know. If they were unsure, they would often invite teams back for a second interview.
Got it. Oh, wow.
Often the same day. So teams would go and wait outside, and then there was like a coordinating staff who would let the team know they could either go home or they had to wait around for another interview. That was kind of how it worked.
Got it. That's crazy. The contrarian view thing blows my mind because normal VCs, like they all kind of have to buy in, or the general partner has to buy in. Like there's a very hierarchical structure there, right? Like usually there's one advocate and they have to kind of fight their way to get everybody to buy in. And it's
No, No, the YC structure just cuts all the bullshit of regular VC. It's just like unbelievably streamlined.
Wow, that's crazy. So it's like it's truly like one person can like get a whole team into YC, even though it may or may not work, but they give them a
Yeah,
shot.
yeah. I mean, again, they may have changed the process now, but
Yeah,
that's how it worked then. I'm sure they've changed the process now. I mean, so much about the world has changed, but it was a very, very interesting thing to witness.
And you built the software like parts of the software like when I was there, I did winter 11. There was just very little software. Like it almost was non-existent. Like I think under like the years of YC being around, they built more and more and more. And even now they're like building more software for the founder support system, which is a complete advantage. It like gives YC like such an advantage over every investor. Like I don't think people realize how amazing it is, but
It's
like
awesome.
you were in a trajectory where I actually saw it changing very quickly. Like there must have been big vision under Sam Altman and you, and like I'm sure you had a lot of ideas and were like implementing a lot of these ideas. Like,
Yeah.
was that a renaissance period for the software in YC, like for them, or?
Yeah, I mean, it was, but it was also, as with all things at YC at that time, it was kind of chaotic by design. There wasn't a roadmap. There was just a discussion every couple of weeks. And Michael Siebel or Seibel, I can never remember how to pronounce it, is a big proponent of this particular methodology for startup road mapping, which is every week or every 2 weeks, whatever it is, you meet with your team and people just put ideas up on a whiteboard, and whatever the most popular ideas are, that's what you build for the next 2 weeks. Then you throw everything else away. You never keep a backlog. You just redo this every 2 weeks. And so ideas that come up again and again and again eventually get implemented. So that was part of how YC's software worked. And then part of it was very much partner-led, of like, a partner would have a particular thing that they absolutely wanted to try, and the software team would pick it up, and we would build different things. And so, when I was there, I built a whole bunch of stuff, and some of it was very experimental. Like we built this software called the Investor Day software. An Investor Day, YC used to do demo days across 2 days, and then they followed it as this experiment with this thing called Investor Day. An Investor Day was a day where they automatically scheduled meetings between companies and investors. And they did like 1,500 meetings in one day, which is absolutely incredible. Like the investors liked the companies stack ranked the investors that liked them, and we used this stable matching algorithm to auto-generate a schedule. And everybody had like 15 to 20 meetings a day. So that was like one of the experiments we did. And they ran that for a couple of years and then they abandoned it because they felt like it wasn't ultimately adding the value. But there were loads of projects like that. Like there was the YC Fellowship that had some software involved as well. We ended up building a lot of software for finance. I built the first version of Startup School. There was a lot of software on Demo Day. I built software that let YC do video interviews, which turned out, I guess, very useful during COVID. And so it was like this, it was almost built like a game where the web page is there and you just like click next, 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 and the next team just like pops on the screen. So that was a cool project to work on. But yeah, I mean, there were lots of really interesting things.
Yeah, so I think our question might be a little similar here. So I was actually thinking about all the internal tools that YC is kind of building. So my question again, like circling back, are there any kind of internal tools that you see building for Shogun as well? Because right now it's like it's becoming so easy to build software just using AI and just scaling it. So is there something that you're trying to build as well that really helps you get that leverage?
I mean, so we did build some internal tools over the years at Shogun. I did actually recently leave the company. So I left as of the 2nd of August. So I'm taking a break right now, which feels very good. But I mean, we did build some internal stuff. Like I'll give you one example of an internal tool built at Shogun. Years and years and years ago, before it got cool to launch on Shopify, I built software to scrape the Shopify App Store every single day. And I was scraping the ranking of every single app. I was scraping the search ranking of every single app. I was scraping the reviews. I was scraping the images. Like everything public on the App Store, I scraped the whole thing. And then I also was observing how changes, like diffs in the description of the apps, was leading to changes in search ranking. So I could kind of reverse engineer how, they changed their heading there. And I see they got higher for this particular search term and they got more reviews as a result. And so that helped us to be very precise in how we extracted the maximum number of installs from the App Store. Because we were able to we had this incredible view that nobody else had at the time, that enabled us to, just understand exactly what to do to get installs from the App Store. So that was like one example of an internal tool that I built at Shogun. That was a quick project. I just built that in a couple of days, but it ended up being very impactful for us.
One thing that blows my mind is the way that YC was building product. Did you take away from that building things in that chaotic way at Shogun, or was it different than that?
Oh, I mean, Shogun, we had this crazy journey where, it started off as just the two co-founders, then the third co-founder, then it became two co-founders again. And we scaled to a massive scale at one point, and we scaled back down. And our process changed a lot over time. It was different for every size of company that we had. Shogun has felt like many different startups over the years, and I think the role of a CEO feels like a different role every 3 to 6 months if you're really growing and changing as a company. And you kind of have to pay attention to that and realize the ways in which your modus operandi is breaking. I think in the early days, we had a fairly chaotic roadmap like that. But in the early days, it was sort of like Finbarr just builds whatever, is the thing. And then we started, collecting lots of customer feedback and feedback from agency partners and building the things that they were asking for. And some amount of it was always gut-driven development, and some amount of it is always customer-driven development. And so I think you have to balance those two things, because customers don't always tell you what the best solution to their problem is. They might describe their problem. It may not be the problem that you think is worth solving. You may think a different problem is actually more worth solving, and they can't even articulate that. And so you have to have some amount of product sense internally and some gut feel for how you're going to solve the problem.
Got it. So there was some consistency. It wasn't just pure chaos. Every 2 weeks, wipe the board.
No.
Okay.
It wasn't. I mean, we've had, at this point, there's even like long-term roadmaps and, quarterly and monthly and all that sort of stuff. But in the early days, it was much more freeform. And to be honest, I think I missed those days. And obviously I left the company recently, so I'm looking to get back to that.
Are you, I guess, like, what, when you leave a company, kind of part of your identity changes immediately. Like, you're, not in there day to day. Like, what are you excited about? Like, what do you see in the future? Is it more investing? Is it like doing another startup? Like, what is getting you up in the morning? Is it AI? Is it?
Yeah. So I've been investing pretty actively over the last few years. I've invested in tons of companies and some funds as well. But I love building things fundamentally. I think I just truly enjoy building things and getting them in people's hands and seeing the happiness and the value that you can give to people. I like solving problems. And so the thing that I'm really obsessed with at the moment is how big can you scale a company while keeping the headcount tiny? I'm really into this idea of tiny companies with absolutely massive revenue. And I have a whole bunch of theories and opinions and hot takes on this topic. But Shogun, ultimately, we raised absolutely tons of money, way too much money. And it didn't really work. We had a very efficient business. We scaled incredibly efficiently to 8-figure ARR. And then we took on a lot of money and did a bunch of very inefficient, unscalable things that didn't work. And there was this period of a lot of pain in the company. Now we're back to being smaller again. But, I just needed a break and I've decided to move on. But I want to get back to that really, really early, 1 or 2 or 3 person team that just moves incredibly fast. And I think I think we're going to see a whole wave of tiny, few person, 100 million ARR companies. And I'm very, very excited about that. I think that revenue per employee is an extremely underrated metric. And that's like the metric that I'm most interested in, actually, for my next thing.
So you're saying if you double an engineering team, you're going to maybe not get better output. And that's...
Yeah, well, okay, so you double an engineering team. If you go from 1 to 2 engineers, you're probably going from 1 person's productivity to like 1.75 people's productivity. If you double from 10 to 20 engineers, you're probably going from like 4 or 5 persons productivity to 7 or 8 people's productivity. Like, it just decays so quickly. And the communication overhead is absolutely crazy. The knowledge, there's just knowledge retention and knowledge loss as people transition in and out of teams and companies. I think there's this totally false narrative that the way to move quickly is to have a big team and to raise a bunch of money and have a big team. And I just think that's completely not true. The fastest companies, the fastest moving companies are the ones that are winning in each space. And what ends up happening is you get all these emergent startups that are doing super well and starting to win markets. And then they take on all this money and they take on all this inefficiency. And then they become the companies that get disrupted by the next wave of startups that are moving really, really fast. And I don't understand why more people don't just stay in that small phase where you're crushing it always. I think there's actually a lot of reasons. I do partly understand the reasons it happens, but I think that a lot of people have learned some painful lessons in the last few years, and we're going to see a bunch of people, myself included, hopefully, build companies that are really great companies that scale to amazing scale, but they're very small in headcount. And AI is obviously a big enabler of that, but I think, that's the thing I'm most interested in right now.
I know one thing is there's a big debate around remote, non-remote. If the team is small, remote, non-remote, like what would you do?
So we went fully remote pretty early at Shogun. Back in 2016, my co-founder Nick moved to Thailand and I was still in the Bay Area. So we were remote from each other. And then we had, I was at YC at the time and Shogun was getting bigger and bigger. And we couldn't really afford Bay Area salaries. So when we went back to working on it, we started hiring contractors and they were in parts of the world that are more affordable. We had, at one point, Shogun was 22 or 23 countries. And it was all around the world. And we truly, I used to kind of joke Shogun never sleeps because we had people in every single time zone, more or less. I wouldn't do that again, actually. I would not do that again. And the reason is it kind of works okay when you're early. But when you start to be bigger, the time zone disparity is just so painful. And the communication, the bandwidth of communication, the latency of communication is so much lower than if you have people with a significant time zone overlap. And so I felt that repeatedly. Like the nice thing about very disparate time zones is it's almost like time travel. When you're going to bed at night, you can message people and say, hey, this is what I'd like to do next. And you wake up the next morning and it's done. That part is awesome. But the part that's not awesome is when you wake up the next morning and it's done incorrectly. And then you have to tell them, hey, actually, I meant it more like this. And then you're waiting another 24 hours before it's actually done. So it has pros and cons. But I think starting again now, I would not do the same thing again. I would still do remote, but it would have to be with a lot of time zone overlap. And we'd have to meet regularly, which is something we've always done at Shogun. We've always met in person regularly. And that's been a lot of fun, actually.
That's really good advice. That's actually really good advice for all founders, honestly, in like Silicon Valley, like if they're going to build a remote company. I've been using a lot of that strategy. So I agree with you 100%. It's like time zone overlap is critical.
Yeah.
For any company. This is something I think Sam Altman or Gary Tan said. It's like there'll be a one-person billion-dollar startup. Do you believe that?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. 100%. I totally believe it.
How? And like, won't there be copycats to take that revenue? Like, how do they do that with AI? Like, how? I mean, how do you envision that like happening?
Well, I mean, there's copycats of every company that's successful, right? But somehow people are still getting to meaningful scale. How will it happen? I think somebody will figure out how to deploy AI in a way that meaningfully replaces all the functions that you need to run a company, and they'll take that into one or many markets. Like an interesting strategy could be one person, $1 billion company. If you have an AI team that can do everything, you don't need just one product. You could have literally hundreds of thousands of products in one company. And even if each one is just very small and you're just taking a small piece of every single market, if the whole thing's automated, you're making a shitload of money. But I think, that's kind of an extreme example of automation. A lesser example would be, if you have a company that's growing quickly, that is unbelievably efficient, that's printing cash, the multiple you're going to get on that company is way larger than another company of the same revenue scale that has an absolutely fucking huge team behind the thing. The value of your company is a function of your growth, your revenue, your margin, and a bunch of intangibles and some other measurables as well. And if your growth is massive and your margin is 99.9% because you've got no team, your customer satisfaction is large, you've got net dollar retention, all these things, it's easier actually to become a small $1 billion company than a big $1 billion company in some ways. Your cost structure is so much less, and that plays a big part into valuations. And I'm not talking about VC valuations here. Like, VC valuations are kind of a bullshit thing, and maybe it'd be more difficult for a one-person company to get a $1 billion VC valuation, but why would one person need a $1 billion VC valuation? They literally wouldn't. And I think that's another change we're going to see. A lot of people just raising a lot less venture capital.
Just reading through everything on Twitter, and there's this new wave of people who are on Product Hunt, scraping through everything that's going on and just building these micro SaaS products, right? So, and just to double click on your whole concept of building $1 billion companies as just one person, I want you to talk about agentic AI, like how building AI agents could really enhance this, because I really don't think we're there yet, but there's still a wave of this happening, because Claude computer use, the new 3.5 Sonnet, I've been trying to use that. It's like, I have it on my different computer. I just put in the API key. I ask it to do the task. It's able to do these smaller tasks. But again, the API pricing is a little too much, I feel, for that task. But how do you think, this can actually scale? Because if it does, I mean, I think it'll just be crazy, because we don't have to go raise those big millions from VCs. It's you just find a product, you solve it, and that's it.
Well, I think the trend with AI tools is they get faster, they get better, and they get cheaper. And so if you bet on that being a continuing trend in AI, then the cost approaches zero, the accuracy approaches 100%, and the speed approaches instantaneous. And so if those things end up being true, then cost isn't a factor, and you can easily replace the vast majority of work people are doing with AI tools. My own sort of dream around this would be, if you're a one-person $1 billion company, you log on to Slack, or it's probably not even Slack, but some tool like Slack, and you say, cool, I'm interested in launching a product in this space. And then you have this whole team that's just like you can say like, hey, at design up a new page for the new product we just shipped yesterday. And you'll see all the different agents working with one another, tagging one another, and they only tag you back into the conversation when they need your approval on something. So that sort of workflow would be awesome. You could get to extremely quick feedback loops and extremely quick deployments. You could have one for at engineering, at marketing, at design, at product, at research. Like, all these different groups could just be a single AI agent. Each one could even be a different company that's providing a tuned model, for each of those things, and they all interact with one another. You just need something that can coordinate between all of them, and manage the memory between all of them, which I think people are building all those kinds of tools. So I think it's infinitely possible.
What's funny is actually we had the big Y Combinator event in San Francisco recently, and I ran into Emmett Shear, and he was talking about these like micro agents all working in unison to like literally create like an ecosystem, almost like cells in a body. It's like they all work together to create something like a company, essentially.
Right.
So
Right.
There is this like thinking that's out there now. There's this other part of me that's thinking like, oh, Microsoft will have its big AI, which will try to take over, and then like you have OpenAI and Anthropic, like the big guys will come out, Google, and they'll just like, there wouldn't be as many as like small agents, but maybe that's the wrong thinking.
Well, I do think a lot of value will accrue to big companies until, I don't know. There's two schools of thought on this, right? One school of thought is like all the value accrues to the biggest companies that have the most data. And I do think a lot of value will accrue to those folks, and they will help a lot of smaller companies as well. But then there's also, I think there's a lot of space for small, super efficient, highly targeted, very focused companies to chip off pieces of the market from all of these bigger companies. And if you have enough people doing that in enough different ways, across enough different verticals, you start to make a meaningful dent in those businesses. So it's going to be super interesting to see how it plays out. Like, I don't think the world is only going to be small companies. There will be big companies out there for sure. But I just think that there's an opportunity for a wave of a new type of company, which is, I don't know, I kind of jokingly, I was trying to figure out what's a good term for a company like this. Like, the word bootstrap is almost like this dirty word. So, and I think that there's kind of a false dichotomy that gets presented of like you either bootstrap and grow slowly or you raise VC and you grow really quickly. And I think that there's something in the middle where you raise some amount of VC with the full intent of growing very quickly, but without going down the path of raising tons of money. And I think, I was trying to come up with a good word for these, and it's a silly word, but maybe we'll see like nanocorns, like these tiny unicorn companies coming out in the next few years. And so that's my personal theory on what we'll see happen.
I mean, that's awesome. I actually love that idea of like a nanocorn. It's like raise 5 million, have 12 employees, and have $1 billion in revenue.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, like some crazy.
Yeah.
Really...
If you get to like 80 to 100 million revenue growing 2x year over year with a team of 12 people, you're massively profitable. That's $1 billion company right there. Like the comps on that would be you're probably over $1 billion.
One question on investing, like what do you look for when you invest in a company? Is it like tenacious founders? Is it a big idea? Like what inspires you to invest in a company?
Well, I've written up some of this on my website, but it's really team. I'm looking for a great team first and foremost. TAM, I'm looking for something which is a big market and interesting to me personally. And I'm interested in all kinds of things. So, it's not like traditionally interesting. I'm interested in things I know nothing about. If somebody comes to me and tells me about an industry that I know absolutely nothing about, that actually piques my interest. And I start asking questions and figuring out how it works. So team, TAM, traction, like what have they done so far? Like have they got customers? Where is it at? Velocity, which is subtly different to traction in terms of like it's how fast are you moving and where are you moving towards? Why are you moving in that direction? And then the final thing that I started looking for is the opportunity for efficiency. Like, can this be massive with only this small team of people or only a few more people? Do the founders want to take it big with only a small team of people? Because my hot take, honestly, on a lot of VC is a lot of companies that raised a ton of money and hired big teams and got really big, they did so despite hiring tons of people and raising loads of money, not because they raised loads of money and hired tons of people. Like some companies were destined to be successful anyway. The market was going to pull out of them. They just made themselves extremely inefficient through the process of, the whole venture thing. I'm kind of looking for founders that actually share that vision of like, we're not going to be a bootstrapped, slow-growing company. We're not going to be a company that is wantonly inefficient and burns tons of money. We're actually trying to be a winner of a space, but by staying really small. And I think the constraints of that actually are really helpful. You're able to remain focused on the things that matter rather than, what happens when you raise loads of money is you hire up loads of people and you start to split your focus. You start working on all kinds of secondary and tertiary things. And you're still working on the things that actually move the needle, but you end up working on a lot of these other things that end up not moving the needle. And if you'd been smaller and you were forced to be more focused, you probably would have done the primary things quicker than you did when you were bigger and you had all these secondary and tertiary things going on as well. And it may be that only the primary things really matter. So we'll see. But those are the things that I look for: team, TAM, traction, velocity, and an appetite for efficiency.
I mean, this was awesome, Finbarr. I feel like you gave so much insight for people. I learned a lot just in this 1 hour. Harshith, do you want to ask any other questions before we end?
I just say about resources, like anybody just sitting, any corner of the world, maybe they're not specifically in SF. Like, are there any kind of resources that you focus on, or is it just like YC Hacker News, or how do you build that, that kind of insight? That's basically that's what I want to know. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's no substitute for trying to move here and getting involved in it. You don't have to have your whole company here. I think actually it's a very smart play to move here and raise money here, but hire elsewhere and build a company elsewhere. As a substitute for that, even if you don't move here, you should still come here, fairly regularly if you can. And as a substitute for that, I mean, I don't know, read Hacker News every day, read some interesting blogs, which you'll find through Hacker News. So it's probably just Hacker News is the answer. Yeah. And then some good YouTube content. Like YC is putting out some quite interesting YouTube content as well.
And also podcasts like these?
Yeah, and podcasts like these, exactly. Yes, podcasts like these, exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Finbarr. This is awesome. I thought it was one of my favorite podcasts so far. So awesome. I appreciate you taking an hour out of your day and doing this with us. It was really super fun, honestly.
It's really it's good fun to chat about this kind of stuff. So I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much for having me on.